You've probably all heard stories of people cast adrift on the ocean who float for days and nights before being rescued. But what would you say to 4 months on the open sea in a small dinghy, surviving only on rainwater and the food you can catch? Well, you know what we'd say. It's a miracle. In April of 1973, Maurice and Marilyn Bailey set off in a 33-foot sloop from England to New Zealand. 7 months later, they passed through the Panama Canal and into the South Pacific.
And we were sailing along very pleasantly. One early morning, we passed this whaling ship.
How's that coffee doing, love?
Don't worry, it's on its way.
When there was a terrific crash against the side of the boat.
I'll go up on deck and have a look.
And we rushed out on deck to see the wild antics of a very wounded whale.
It must have hit us.
I think we're going to have to abandon ship.
We had lots of things on board, very personal things, a lot of wedding presents, various things that we were taking with us. And then when you have to abandon a boat, the difficulty is, what do you take?
Maurice and Marilyn began a routine evacuation, not realizing that they would be facing months at sea. And with no radio on board, they were unable to send a distress call before they abandoned ship.
Is that the last bag?
Yes, that's it.
Well, one of the things I had collected from the boat was the camera. And as we sat in the dinghy and the boat was obviously sinking, I started to snap off shots. I don't really think I knew what I was consciously looking at, taking shots. I just snapped, snap, snap. When the boat finally went down, it was difficult to imagine what kind of environment we'd now placed ourselves into.
Our plan was to row due south, to be taken by the wind and current to the Galapagos Islands. So for 3 days and for 3 nights we rowed. We rowed and rowed and rowed. But the winds and currents were too strong for us. After 3 days we realized we'd failed and we were going to drift past the Galapagos Islands. We were afloat on an ocean covering a third of the Earth's surface. We couldn't picture it really. And around us, especially during the hot period, all there was around us was the shimmering heat of the sea, reflecting the sun back to us.
Within days, their food and water supplies were exhausted, and they turned to the sea to stay alive.
We had left the fishhooks out of our emergency pack in Panama. So Marlon evolved this brilliant idea of bending safety pins into hooks, and we used those pins to fish. And the fish became the mainstay of our diet thereafter.
It's a brilliant idea, love.
Look out.
Well done.
There we go. We've got something.
We've got one, hang on, there's one here. Ah, you beauty! Get in there. It worked.
Our first fish.
It bloody worked.
Once we had discovered how to catch them with a little safety pin and string, catching the fish was not a problem, and killing the fish and gutting them was not a problem. The problem came in actually eating raw fish. But if you're very hungry, you will begin to nibble at something, and eventually, because you are hungry, you will eat it.
After about the 7th day, we saw a ship. I saw a ship that was so close. If you can picture us on the surface of the sea, the curvature of the earth meant that our horizon was only 2 miles away. So that ship was less than 2 miles away from us.
Marilyn, give me the flares. I think there's a ship out there.
We fired our flares at it.
Here!
And it sailed on. Completely ignored us.
He didn't see us.
That's the last of the flares.
It never occurred to me that we would not survive, and I always thought we would be rescued quite quickly. But when the first boat had gone past in a very few days, then I began to realise that it was very difficult for other vessels to see us.
Over the next few weeks, they passed several more ships, but none of them could spot the small raft on the horizon.
It's no use, love. Nothing's happening.
By now, the Baileys were entering an area feared by sailors for its sudden storms and unpredictable winds.
Now we had overcast skies and terrible cold, and it started to rain. And we didn't know when it would rain again, so we collected every bit we could. And we collected it off the side of the life raft, which washed all the rubberized coating off the life raft, and the water was contaminated thereafter with this rubberized coating. But it was glorious. We had this wonderful water, and we could digest our protein now.
I think we'll have to ration ourselves to half a day each from now on. Sorry.
Maurice and Marilyn had been adrift for nearly 2 months without proper provisions, and there were more serious problems ahead.
There we go. No!
What's up?
On their 50th day at sea, their dinghy was punctured.
I don't believe it. Pass me the pump.
Yes, okay. The pump's coming up.
Right, can you move the oar out the way, love?
It would now take constant pumping and bailing to stay afloat while they fished for their meals. Worse yet, their life raft had also been damaged by the spines of a triggerfish.
Okay, yeah,
All right.
I think it's only a...
As we sat in our life raft, we were never free of water, and gradually we developed saltwater sores that grew deeper and deeper. A thrombosis developed in my leg, and gradually that clot went round to my lung, and I inhaled it, and I coughed it out. And coughing it out, I coughed part of my lung out as well. I suppose anybody on land would have been rushed to hospital and been under intensive care in that state, but I had to endure it without any help at all.
That's it. Over you go. That's it. Here we go.
I thought, maybe this is where I'm going to die.
Listen, we're going to get out of here. We're going to get rescued. And you're going to get better.
It never occurred to me that he would die. And it was a thought that I didn't really want to think about, that I would be there on my own. We'd started this voyage together, and I was really quite determined we'd finish it together. I think the will to survive is very strong in some people and not in others. I do believe it's stronger in the female of the species rather than the male. But I didn't think that it was my time to die, and I was determined that we would survive if it was at all possible.
They had now been on the water for nearly 4 months.
Our 119th day at sea began like all the others. We fished from dawn, we consumed our fish, and then sometime in the afternoon, Marilyn roused me. She said, I can hear a ship.
Maurice, there's a boat. There's a boat out there.
I had very sharp hearing, and I did hear the sound, or the engine, the sound of an engine.
We're here!
And almost you didn't believe it, because we hadn't heard ships for quite a long time. But there was this little thump, 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 and I knew a ship was out there somewhere.
And it sailed off. And I dropped on my knees in despair. I remember saying to Marilyn, Let it go on. Save your strength. This is our life now, on the sea, amongst the fishes and the birds.
It's coming back, Morris. Morris, it's coming back. I hear it, look.
And I looked up, and sure enough, this ship was here.
It's coming back.
Hello! Hello! It's seen us! It's seen us!
When we were actually rescued, we had the hardest part was climbing up the ladder up the side of the vessel. But he was rescued, so the adrenaline goes and you do it. But when we got on the deck, we hadn't been standing up or moving around for 4 months, and our leg muscles were quite wasted. And I think we more or less crawled onto the deck and were just happy just to sit there on a blanket.
After 4 months at sea, Maurice and Marilyn were safe at last. No one had ever survived being adrift for so long.
We survived, I think, because we were tolerant of each other. We lived as a team. And we worked as a team. And there was nothing that embittered our relationship during that time. And I think that was the reason we survived.
But it was more than just a survival story. It was a miracle.